The church was quiet, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Outside, the crisp Portland air pressed gently against the stained glass windows, and inside, everything stood still except for Walter Hughes's eyes. They kept drifting to the empty seat beside him. That front row seat. The one Karen always reserved for Madison at school plays and Sunday services. Now it sat hollow during her mother's funeral. He had half expected the door to creak open mid-service to hear the hurried click of heels against the stone floor, and to turn around and find Madison rushing in her face full of guilt and eyes searching for his. But the door stayed shut. The seat stayed vacant. And Karen's casket rested a few feet away, beautiful and final. People surrounded him, neighbors, colleagues, even the pastor who had married them stood at the podium offering a soft-spoken eulogy. But Walter heard very little of it. The words blurred into each other just like the faces. All of it felt distant, unreal, like watching someone else's grief play out in his body. His sister Carolyn had flown in from Atlanta, sitting 2 rows back, dabbing her eyes now and then. She offered to stay longer to help him settle things, whatever that meant. Mary Ann from the office came too. She didn't speak much, but her presence was steady, the kind that didn't need permission to be comforting. Still, none of them were Madison, and her absence sliced deeper than anything spoken from the pulpit. After the service, as people lined up to offer their condolences, soft murmurs of "she's in a better place," or "at least she's not in pain anymore." Walter nodded politely, murmuring thank yous, while his heart sank like a stone into water. He didn't want reassurances. He wanted Karen back. He wanted the woman who held his hand through 3 miscarriages, the woman who sat beside him at every investor meeting, even when chemo made her bones ache. He wanted to know why the one person who meant the world to both of them wasn't there. He didn't ask anyone. He didn't have to. The answer found him the next morning in the form of an Instagram story. Carolyn's husband had been scrolling through his phone at the breakfast table when he turned the screen toward Walter, hesitating. A boomerang played silently. Madison laughing, glass of champagne raised in the air, rooftop skyline behind her. Best birthday bash ever. Love you, Chloe. Walter didn't react at first. Not outwardly. His breath didn't hitch. His face didn't change. He just placed his coffee mug on the table and stood up. Walked out to the driveway. Sat in the car with the door closed and the windows up. For 23 minutes he stared at the dashboard, unmoving. There were no tears, just a silent weight pressing against his chest. He thought of the last real conversation he had with Madison weeks before Karen passed. She was supposed to help with a presentation for their family business, one of their largest investor meetings of the year. She had canceled last minute. "I need to recharge," she had said, like it was a chore she was avoiding. Karen, already frail by then, had simply smiled and said, "Let her go. You'll only chase her further if you push." Karen's grace, always larger than life, even in pain. He had tried to carry that grace. He had tried to believe Madison was just overwhelmed by grief, that maybe she didn't know how to process loss. But when he saw her smiling, glass raised, celebrating someone else's life on the very day they buried the woman who gave her hers, something inside him fractured. Not in anger, but in clarity. Later that day, after the condolences faded, and the flowers started wilting on the steps, Walter walked into Madison's old room. The bed was still made sheets untouched. The desk still held her old notebooks, and in the corner a faded bottle of her favorite vanilla perfume sat quietly forgotten but not erased. He stood in the doorway and breathed in slowly. No lectures, no shouting, no slammed doors, just the beginning of a decision. A boundary not born from rage, but from resolve. Madison had made her choice. She had drawn the line, and now he would draw his. That night, the house was still. For the first time in days, he didn't turn on the television to fill the silence. He didn't reread old texts. He didn't pore over Karen's voicemail one more time. He simply sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker to life one by one, casting golden halos over fallen leaves. And in that quiet moment, Walter Hughes finally allowed the absence beside him to mean something. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and for once, he didn't care. He didn't think about Madison's next move or whether she'd call with some half-hearted apology. He didn't try to guess if her post had already disappeared into the void of social media, buried under more parties, more moments of curated joy. For tonight, the silence was enough. Walter walked through the house slowly, like it had aged a decade in the past week. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon wood polish and lavender, Karen's favorite scent combination. She used to light candles just before dinner, always insisting it helped soften the day. He paused by the staircase, one hand resting on the railing, eyes lifting toward the second floor, where Madison's room remained untouched. He didn't go up again. Not tonight. The scent of her perfume still lingered in that space, stubborn and clinging like a ghost that wasn't ready to leave. He wasn't ready either. But tonight wasn't about reopening old doors. It was about acknowledging that some would stay closed. In the living room, he settled into his chair by the fireplace, the one Karen always called his thinking seat. She had picked it out herself years ago, a plush, deep brown leather that had grown softer with time. A blanket still folded neatly on the armrest sat where she used to drape it over his shoulders on colder nights. He unfolded it not for warmth but for memory. The fire crackled a soft rhythm against the stillness. He stared into the flames, not expecting answers, not even chasing peace, just being, just breathing in the quiet. There had been too many days lately where he existed only for obligation. Now, for a moment, he existed for himself. He thought of Karen, of the strength in her eyes, even as her body gave out. She had always been the bridge between him and Madison, the translator, the peacemaker, the one who somehow knew how to speak both his language of structure and Madison's dialect of wild freedom. Without her, the bridge had collapsed, and he wasn't sure it could be rebuilt. The clock chimed 10. Outside, the wind had picked up rustling leaves across the porch in little spirals. He let the fire die down naturally, no longer feeling the need to keep it alive past its time. There was no metaphor in that. Just life. Fires end. People leave. Some goodbyes are spoken, others are chosen in silence. Before heading to bed, he checked the front door locked as always. He paused with his hand on the knob, then reached for the chain Karen used to insist on using even in the safest neighborhood. It clicked into place. Habit. Ritual. Respect. Upstairs, he didn't glance toward Madison's room. Not this time. He entered his own, changed into pajamas, and sat briefly at the edge of the bed they once shared. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. A cup of now dusty pens sat beside them. He didn't move them. Lying down, he turned off the lamp and stared at the ceiling in the dark. His thoughts were quiet. Not gone, but quiet. That was new. That was something. He closed his eyes. The house exhaled with him, and finally Walter Hughes slept. Walter hadn't planned on calling her. Not that day, not even that week. But something about the way Karen's old perfume still lingered in the hallway, the way the grocery list remained on the fridge in her handwriting, made the silence inside the house feel too sharp, too loud. And so 2 days after the funeral, he picked up the phone and dialed Madison's number. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad," she said, cheerful. Background noise filtered through the line coffee machines, hissing faint music, muffled laughter. She was at a cafe, maybe in Los Angeles, maybe not. It did not matter. Walter sat at his desk, hand resting on a yellow legal pad that still bore the agenda Karen had scribbled weeks before her health worsened. He stared at it as he spoke. "You didn't come to the funeral." There was a pause, the kind that told him she had expected the question, but not so soon. Then came the sigh, a tired, casual sound, as if he had reminded her to pay a forgotten bill. "I know," she said. I couldn't, Dad. I needed space. You know how I get." Walter didn't respond. Not yet. She continued, unfazed by his silence. "And also, it was Chloe's birthday. I told her I'd be there. She would have killed me if I canceled last minute. I know it sounds bad, but I needed something light, something fun. I didn't want to drown in all that." He could feel something shift in his chest, not anger, but something colder, a hollow clarity. Madison kept talking. "And not to be harsh or anything, but family isn't everything to me. I choose what I want over what's expected. That's just who I am. You raised me to be independent, remember? Walter smiled faintly, the kind of smile people wear in courtrooms and cemeteries. One that has nothing to do with happiness. Okay, he said simply. Okay. Madison sounded uncertain for the first time. I understand. And he hung up. He sat still for a few minutes after the phone resting in his open palm like a stone. The room didn't feel heavier. It felt cleaner, like someone had opened a window he hadn't noticed was closed. He placed the phone down, opened his laptop, and began. First, he called the bank and revoked Madison's access to the family accounts. The voice on the other end, polite and professional, asked if he was sure. He was. Then he sent a note to Marianne asking her to process Madison's termination from her internship with the company. He kept the tone respectful, brief. No explanation, just finality. Lastly, he called the estate attorney. They hadn't updated the trust since Madison's college graduation. It was time. Karen would have hesitated. She would have said, let her make her own mistakes. She's still learning. Walter used to believe that too. But there came a time when enabling someone became a quiet betrayal of yourself. And he was done betraying himself. Later that night, Walter stood in the doorway of Madison's old bedroom again. He hadn't turned on the lights. The moonlight filtered in through the sheer curtains, softening everything inside the books she left behind the corkboard with old concert tickets. A dried flower from her senior prom still pinned to the wall. He stepped inside slowly and sat on the edge of the bed. It sank a little beneath him like it remembered who he was. He didn't cry, not because he wasn't sad, but because his grief had taken a different shape now. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't loud, it was the kind that settled deep and made a home. He looked at the bookshelf, running his fingers across the spines of her favorite childhood novels. Karen had read those to her every night, even when Madison was old enough to read on her own. It was never about the story, it was about the ritual, the presence. Presence. That was what Karen always gave so freely, and what Madison withheld so easily. He reached into the bottom drawer of her old desk and found a faded photo. Madison, at 8 years old, sitting on her mother's lap, both of them grinning, cheeks smudged with cake frosting. He turned it over. Karen's handwriting read, "She's our light." He folded the photo gently and placed it back where he found it. Then he stood, turned off the hallway light, and went to bed. As he lay there in the dark, he replayed the call in his mind. Not her words, but her tone. The ease. The absence of weight in her voice when she said she'd chosen a birthday over a burial. He tried to summon anger. He couldn't. Only understanding. Painful, complete understanding. She had drawn a line, and now he had drawn his. That night he slept deeply. Not because everything was okay, but because for the first time he had stopped waiting for her to become someone else. The next morning the quiet returned like clockwork. No messages. No follow-up calls. Madison had said what she needed to say, and Walter had heard it all. There was nothing left to clarify. He ate breakfast alone, scrambled eggs, toast, 1 cup of black coffee. The same meal he had prepared every morning since Karen died. Routine was not comfort, but it was motion. Motion was enough. When he arrived at the office, Marianne handed him a few papers to sign termination forms, account revocation confirmations. She didn't ask why. She had been with the company long enough to read between silences. "Anything else you need me to handle?" she asked gently. Walter shook his head. "No. Thank you." He retreated into his office, closed the door, and sat behind his desk. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting sharp lines across the floor. He stared at the empty chair across from him, the one Madison used to sit in when she interned last summer. Back then, she wore slacks a size too big and carried a tote bag that always fell off her shoulder. She showed up late, left early, but laughed loudly in between, charming the rest of the staff with ease. Walter remembered watching her walk through those halls and thinking, maybe she's finding her way. But now he realized she had never been looking for a path. She had only ever been looking for a way out. He pulled open the drawer to his right, the one Karen never liked him keeping cluttered, and tucked away a folder with Madison's name on it. past evaluations, her project notes a letter Karen once wrote to Madison on her 21st birthday. He didn't throw anything away, but he did close the drawer and lock it. That afternoon, as the sky turned a steely gray and rain gently tapped the windows, Walter sat in the sunroom, the one Karen used when she couldn't sleep. Her old books still lined the shelves. He reached for one without looking at the title and opened to a random page. But he didn't read. He just held the book thumb, brushing against the paper, thinking about all the things they gave to Madison over the years: opportunities, patience, forgiveness, shelter, and how little she had seemed to value any of it. He was not angry. He was tired of hoping love would be enough, tired of making space for someone who kept walking out. He looked toward the window, watched the hedges Karen had trimmed herself for years now grow wild. He made a mental note to call a gardener. Then almost immediately, he decided not to. Let them grow. Let something be wild for once. By evening, he had poured himself a second glass of wine, not out of sadness, but out of ritual. He sipped it slowly, the fire in the sunroom crackling low. The warmth touched his bones, but not his heart. At exactly 7:46 p.m., his phone buzzed on the side table. A text. From Madison. No apology, no softness. Just, did something change with the company HR's not replying? Walter read it once, then again. He set the phone down without responding, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. Madison had drawn the line. And for the first time in his life as a father, Walter Hughes had decided not to erase it. He simply let it stand. 2 days passed before her name lit up his phone again. Walter was reviewing quarterly payroll numbers when it buzzed on the corner of his desk. The name Madison blinked once, twice. He let it ring. Then, without hesitation, hit decline. The silence that followed felt solid, earned. Minutes later, a text appeared. Hey, are you ignoring me? What's going on with the company? I can't log into my account. HR isn't answering. My card just declined at the airport. Walter didn't reply. He didn't need to. Some messages were better left unanswered, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. That evening, as the sun began to lower behind the trees in the backyard, Marianne knocked gently on his office door. Sir, she said, hesitating slightly. The bank called. Madison tried to use the joint card. It was declined. She's upset. Walter leaned back in his chair. Let her be. Marianne stepped closer, her expression soft. Are you sure this is the right move? Walter looked at her. She had been with the company for over a decade. She'd seen Madison grow up from a shy, wide-eyed teenager to the polished, distant adult she had become. This question wasn't judgment, it was concern. I'm not punishing her, he said quietly. I'm accepting what she told me. The phone rang again that night. Walter picked up this time, not because he wanted to, but because there were some things that needed to be said out loud, without the filter of texts or emails or posts. Madison's voice came in sharp and fast. Why the hell aren't my cards working? I'm trying to book a flight and the airline says payment failed. Then I called the company and Dad, did you fire me? Walter waited a moment before answering. Yes, he said, I terminated your contract and removed you from the family trust. Silence. Then a single breath, short and jagged. He remembered that same sound from the day he told her Karen had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, but this time it wasn't grief, it was panic. You can't just do that, she whispered. You can't just cut me off. Walter kept his tone calm, almost gentle. You said family isn't everything. I'm honoring that. Her voice rose. I didn't mean God. I didn't mean it like that. I was upset. You're seriously ruining my life over one comment. Walter almost laughed. Not out of humor, but out of disbelief. Ruining your life. Madison, you haven't even lived it yet. Not really. Not without a safety net. There was a pause. Then came the same line he had heard before, wrapped now in desperation instead of confidence. You made a choice, he said quietly. And now I'm making mine. We're even. She screamed something. He didn't catch the words. The call ended with a hard click. He imagined the screen on her phone might have cracked under the pressure. Walter sat still for a long time. He wasn't proud of how calm he felt. In fact, it unnerved him. Was this numbness? Or was it something deeper, resolve? He didn't feel triumphant. There was no victory in this. Only an ache that had finally stopped asking for relief. That evening he poured himself a drink and sat in the sunroom, the fire glowing low, the room heavy with memory. Outside, the hedges rustled in the wind, untrimmed, unruly, just as Karen would have hated. He didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. Madison had said it herself. Family isn't everything. And for the first time, Walter truly believed she meant it. It happened on a Tuesday. Walter had just come back from the grocery store, 2 bags in each hand. Milk, fruit, coffee, and a loaf of bread he never used to buy until Karen passed. The driveway looked the same, the front yard a little overgrown. But something was off. That was when he saw the car. It took him a moment to recognize it. Madison's old sedan. The one she swore she'd never drive again after college. The one he helped her buy when she turned 21. The car had scratches, now paint fading. It looked used, lived in, real. She was leaning against the hood, arms crossed, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Her hair was tied up like it used to be in high school, thrown together like she had not planned to be seen. She looked thinner, older. Not from age, but from something heavier. Reality. Walter slowed his steps. Part of him wanted to keep walking right back to the car keys and hand drive around the block, just to avoid whatever this was. But he didn't. He couldn't. He had never been a coward. And he wasn't going to start now. She took off the sunglasses when he got close. Her eyes were tired, red around the edges. "You really weren't going to respond to me," she said, voice low, cracked. Walter didn't answer. He unlocked the front door, held it open behind him. "Come inside," he said. She followed like a guest, hesitating at the threshold. The house had not changed. Same couch, same photos, same scent, lavender and lemon, Karen's favorite. Madison stood there for a moment like she was waiting for permission to enter her own past. Walter set the bags down in the kitchen and began putting groceries away, wordless. No coffee offer, no hug, nothing soft. She needed to feel the distance. Finally, she spoke. "You disowned me." He kept his back turned. "I respected your boundaries," he said. "You said family wasn't everything. I believed you." She let out a breath, part laugh, part tremble. It was a stupid thing to say. She paused. "I was angry and immature, but you took it to a level I didn't think you were capable of." Walter turned then slowly and leaned against the counter. His eyes met hers, steady, calm, but not cold. "You weren't there when your mother died, Madison. You skipped her funeral. That wasn't immaturity. That was choice." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. "I didn't know how to deal with it," she said. "Every time I saw her getting weaker, I felt like I was disappearing too. I didn't want to remember her like that." Walter nodded once. He understood. He truly did. But understanding did not erase the facts. "I wanted to bury my wife with my daughter standing beside me," he said. "Not because it would have made it easier, but because it was the last thing she deserved. Just presence, that's all." Madison sat down on the edge of the couch, curling into herself like a child. "I messed up," she whispered. "I know I did." Walter didn't respond. He let the silence carry the weight of her admission. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on a photo of the 3 of them at the beach, sunburned and laughing, Karen holding Madison's hand. "I miss her every day," she said. "More than I thought I would. More than I know how to handle." "So do I," Walter replied. "But I don't get to skip the hard parts just because they're painful. That's not how love works." She nodded slowly, then asked, "What now? What happens to us?" Walter walked over to the chair across from her and sat, his hands folded, voice even. "I don't know," he said truthfully, "but I know what won't happen. We're not going back to how things were. The company isn't yours anymore. The trust isn't yours. That's done." Her head dropped. "I figured." "This isn't punishment," he said. It's about trust. You broke it. And trust isn't something you beg for. It's something you rebuild. She looked up at him with eyes that looked too much like her mother's. And for a moment it broke him. "Do you think we'll ever get there?" she asked. "I don't know," he said again, because it was the only answer he had. Madison stood slowly, walked to the door, then turned just before leaving. "I'm sorry," she said. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a quiet human apology. Walter stood there long after she left. The house returned to silence. But something about the way she walked away this time, it did not feel final. Later that night he walked upstairs and opened the door to her old bedroom. It was still untouched. Her books, her desk, a small sticky note still taped to the mirror, Karen's handwriting, "Don't forget to eat breakfast. Love you." Walter stared at it for a long time. Karen had always known how to love gently, even when Madison did not deserve it. Walter had tried to follow her example, but he loved differently. He loved with structure, with limits, with hard lines. And maybe that was not wrong. Maybe it was just different. The house was quiet again. But this time the silence did not hurt. It simply existed. Walter went about his days with a kind of slow steadiness. He rose early, made his own breakfast, read the paper by the window where Karen used to sip her coffee. He answered emails, signed papers, met with his board, and drove home before dark. The routines held him in place not because they distracted him, but because they asked nothing of him. No pretending, no performing, just living. For the first time in months, he did not feel haunted. The grief was still there, of course. It lingered like an old friend who no longer demanded to be the center of every room. It followed him on Sunday mornings when he visited the cemetery. It sat with him in the sunroom as the wind moved gently through the hedges Karen used to trim with care. But it no longer suffocated him. And Madison, well, Madison was gone. Not gone in the way Karen was, but distant in the way of someone who had chosen a different story. A life without family at the center, a life without shared memories, without the weight of expectations. And as much as Walter had wanted to bring her back, he had stopped chasing. She had left the door. He had simply stopped holding it open. He heard about her now and then. A neighbor mentioned seeing her at the cafe on 5th wearing an apron and a tired smile. One of the former interns at the company said she was helping a design firm downtown, part-time, quiet, different. Walter nodded at these reports and said nothing. He did not ask for more. He did not try to interpret them. He had let go not in anger but in understanding. Letting go was not abandonment. It was trust. Trust that she would find her way even if he was not guiding her anymore. Then one morning, a letter arrived. There was no return address. Just his name on the front of the envelope written in the same slanted print he had seen on birthday cards and sticky notes for years. He knew it was from her before he even opened it. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at it for a while, the envelope resting on the wood like something sacred. When he finally unfolded the single page it held, no grand apology, no elaborate explanation, just words, honest, sparse, human. Dad, I am not writing to beg. I am writing to thank you. Thank you for not shielding me, for letting me fall, for not calling when I cried wolf. I hated you for it, but now I think I understand. Love is not always warm. Sometimes it is sharp. And now I know what it feels like to earn something, not just inherit it. I am working. I am paying rent. I miss you. I miss Mom. I am still figuring things out, but I am doing it on my own. I thought you should know. Walter did not cry when he finished reading, but he sat for a long time watching the sunlight move across the floor, listening to the old clock tick beside the fridge. He believed her, not because the words were perfect. They were not. They were messy, scattered, a little unsure, but that made them feel real, and belief did not require a reply. Not yet. He folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer of his desk next to her baby bracelet and the copy of her high school graduation speech. He did not text her. He did not write back. He did not call. He needed time. Maybe she did too. There was a strange grace in distance. It allowed space for truth to settle without interruption, without demands, without rewriting the story, just to make it more palatable. Walter went on with his day. That afternoon, Marianne noticed something. "You seem lighter," she said as they wrapped up a meeting. Walter smiled, surprised by the sound of it. "I think I stopped expecting things to go back to the way they were." She nodded. "Letting go of the idea of fairness," she said softly. "That was the hardest part for me, with my sister." Walter looked at her but said nothing. Pain recognized pain, and there was something sacred about that kind of quiet acknowledgement between survivors. As the holidays approached, Walter set the table for one. He cooked a smaller meal. He still placed 2 wine glasses out of habit, out of hope. He poured one for Karen, even though she was no longer there to drink it. He sat by the fireplace, the house still the quiet, now comforting. And when he looked over at the untouched glass across from him, he whispered aloud, voice low, "Sure. She wrote to me," he said. "She's finding her way." He did not know what came next. He did not need to. Sometimes peace did not arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it looked like a quiet house, a steady breath, and a letter that said only one thing, "I'm trying." And sometimes that was enough. The weeks that followed the letter were quiet. Not the painful kind of silence Walter once dreaded, but the kind that lets you breathe. He did not check his phone every morning anymore. He did not search her name on the company's old database or look for traces of her online. The world had become smaller, tighter, but not emptier. One morning, as Walter left the office, an old colleague from the firm approached him in the parking lot. "I saw your daughter," she said with a kind smile, "at the market on 7th. She looked different, grown." Walter thanked her, nodded, and drove home without asking for more. He did not need more. Letting go, he realized, was not giving up. It was simply the choice to stop bleeding from wounds someone else refused to close. That night, he took the letter back out from the drawer, read it again, slowly this time. It still hurt the memories. The distance, the absence of Karen in every corner of the house, but beneath the pain was something steadier, something cleaner, like the foundation of a house after a storm. Walter folded the letter again and slid it back beside the bracelet and the graduation speech. Then he opened the window of the sunroom and let the late autumn air pour in. He didn't need an answer yet. He didn't need Madison to come home. He just needed to know she was trying. And she was. That had to be enough. The first snow fell quietly. Walter stood by the window watching the flakes gather along the edges of the hedges Karen once trimmed with near-military precision. The world looked softer and white, like the cold had pressed pause on everything, even grief. In the living room, a small fire crackled. It was not for warmth, really, just sound. Life needed sound, sometimes even the smallest kinds. On the mantel, nothing had changed. Her photo was still there, Karen in the garden gloves on dirt on her cheek, grinning like she had just won a war with the roses. He reached for the drawer. It stuck a little like always, but gave way with a tug. The letter was still there, folded, neatly placed between her baby bracelet and the graduation speech she had read aloud on that wide, warm afternoon so many years ago. Walter unfolded the letter once more, not to study it, not even to reread every word. He just held it, felt the weight of paper and ink and everything that had gone unsaid between them. It was enough. He did not need a second letter. He did not need her to ring the doorbell holding flowers and regret. He did not need a family photo retaken in matching sweaters in front of the fireplace. Some wounds did not close neatly. They scarred. But scars told you where you had been. And Walter had learned, finally, not to keep reopening them, just to prove they still hurt. A part of him still missed her. Of course he did. But missing someone was not the same as needing to fix them. And tonight, as he poured a glass of red wine, Karen's favorite, never his, he placed a second glass across the table again. Out of ritual, out of memory, maybe even out of hope. He raised his own glass quietly. To showing up, he whispered. No reply came, only the soft hiss of snow melting against the window pane. But he did not need an answer. He had a letter in the drawer, and sometimes that was all the peace a man needed to carry on. The fire burned low as Walter sat at the kitchen table, the letter resting just inches from his fingertips. He did not cry. That season of his grief had passed. But he did feel something unfamiliar settle in his chest, not joy, not sadness. Something quieter. Something like rest. For the first time in a long time, he was not waiting. Not for a call, not for an apology, not for some miracle moment where everything would snap back into place. He was simply here, in this house, in this moment, in this stillness. The doorbell did not ring. The phone did not buzz. And yet Walter did not feel alone. That was the strange thing about healing. It never arrived when you were looking for it. It came in sideways through a letter in a drawer, a quiet afternoon, or a memory that no longer knocked the air out of your lungs. He walked slowly through the hallway, his fingers grazing the family portraits lining the wall. One of Madison at 5 years old in a yellow raincoat holding a frog like it was the greatest treasure in the world. One of the three of them in front of the house, just after moving in Karen's hand, resting gently on Madison's shoulder. He paused there, not to linger in the past, but to remind himself that the past still belonged to him. Madison's absence did not erase the childhood she had lived here. Her mistakes did not undo the love that had once existed so fully between them. And the distance between them, now emotional, physical, did not have to be punishment. It could simply be space. Space for her to grow. Space for him to breathe. Space for both of them to decide without pressure, without noise, if the bridge between them was ever meant to be rebuilt. That night, Walter did not touch the letter again. He did not reread it. He did not analyze each sentence the way he might have once done, searching for openings, loopholes, hidden meanings. He left it in the drawer, not forgotten. Just safe, like a seed planted in winter. No guarantee it would grow, but held still in the quiet hope that maybe one day when the thaw comes, something might. Sometimes the loudest revelations come not in the heat of an argument, but in the quiet after the door closes. In the end, it was not a courtroom, a fight, or a dramatic confession that changed the course of this father's life. It was a drawer, a letter, and the silence between two people who had once been everything to each other. The hardest part was never the absence. It was learning how to live alongside it without letting it harden your heart. Walter did not raise his voice. He did not chase her down. He simply stepped back and allowed the truth to stand on its own, not out of cruelty, but out of respect. Respect for himself, respect for the years he had poured into being a father. And maybe in some quiet way, respect for her journey too. The lesson is simple, yet weighty. Sometimes dignity looks like restraint. Sometimes the truest form of justice is not revenge or punishment, but the calm conviction to let go without bitterness. To let someone walk away, not because you stopped loving them, but because they stopped honoring that love. And in doing so, you create space for something deeper to grow. Even if it takes root in your absence. We live in a world that is quick to judge, quick to shout, and quick to draw lines. But real strength often lives in stillness. Like a lighthouse standing firm through the fog, it does not chase ships that drift away. It simply stays lit in case one day they find their way home. You may not always be understood. You may even be miscast in someone else's story. But if you hold true to what matters, your values, your truth, the silence you choose, can be louder than any defense you offer. And maybe that is the point. Like an old oak that bends through storms yet never breaks, we are not here to control the winds, only to plant our roots deep enough that when they pass, we are still standing. Take a moment to reflect on this story. Ask yourself not what you would have done differently, but what boundaries you need to set for your own peace. And if this story has stirred something in your heart, consider sharing it with someone who might be quietly facing a storm of their own. Because sometimes all it takes is one warm story, passed hand to hand, heart to heart, to remind someone they are not alone. And in that way, even the quietest truth can find its way home.